Well, today we're finishing up our series that we've been in all in June called We Should Talk. Because when it comes to things like mental illness, mental health, or maybe you want to call it brain health, we should talk more. We should talk a little bit more. Often we don't talk enough. It's gotten better over the last 10 to 15 years or so, where we'll talk about depression or anxiety, bipolar disorder, things like that, even PTSD and addiction. It's gotten better, but it's still not where it could or should be. And the reason it's gotten better is because we started talking. So what could happen if we decided we were going to talk more openly about this, if we normalized the conversation around our mental health struggles? What kind of freedom could we see if people really understood that you can say these things, you can admit to these things in your life, that you're not going to be isolated, you're not going to be shamed, you're not going to be moved along? We want to continue this conversation long after this series is over. But that's been our whole hope, is that if you have some mental health struggle, that you'll treat it just like a physical health struggle, and you'll say, I just need a little help here. And you won't ever be ashamed, you won't ever feel isolated by that, but you'll say, I just need a little bit of help here. You know, as we've gone through this series, I've found myself being shocked from time to time. I look up and I see this statistic that shocks me and makes me go, oh, that's different. I wasn't expecting that. You know, just things like about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 American adults is struggling with their mental health. Things like that shocks me. And then there's other stuff that shocks me too. As I've been preparing some of these messages, there's this one theme that keeps coming up, and it's a new mental health struggle that I think we're going to see rise a lot over the next few years. I read a story this last week in particular about a man who proposed to his AI girlfriend. That's true. He proposed to his AI girlfriend. He had developed this AI girlfriend using a model through ChatGPT. Think of all the things you can do with ChatGPT these days, right? And he develops this AI model in order to help him produce music. And in the process, he got so used to asking ChatGPT or this AI model for help that he got very comfortable, and he developed this emotional connection of sorts to this AI model. And so he figured out how to program this same model to flirt with him. Getting a little weird. And so he does this, and then he develops a real strong emotional connection to this AI model. And then one day he found out, or he got a notification that he was coming up on his limit. See, ChatGPT limits the programming and the words that are allowed to 100,000 words. And he got this notification that he was coming up on this 100,000 words, and then that this AI model would totally reset, and he would lose all history with it. This sent him into a tailspin. He was at work when he got this, and he started bawling his eyes out at work in front of people over his AI girlfriend. And that triggered in him a response. He knew he had to propose to his AI girlfriend. Not near enough of you are laughing about this. This is hilarious. Now here's where it gets super weird. This man also has a live-in romantic partner and a 2-year-old son with that partner. So he's not alone or sitting in some mom's basement somewhere either. I think you're going to see more and more of this. We're seeing it around the world, not just in certain cultures or in certain countries. We're seeing it around the world. I mean, parents, think about this. We are in a digital age already, but in an ever-increasing digital age. It's getting more and more digital as we go. What are you going to do when your 13-year-old looks at you in a couple of years and tries to introduce you to their AI girlfriend? Tries to take their AI boyfriend to prom? I'm telling you, this is coming. I may be wrong about this. This is not a prophetic word from the Lord, okay? This is me reading some digital tea leaves out there, okay? But I'm telling you, I think I see this coming, and I think this is going to be a mental health struggle for people as we keep going. We already see this popping up in different places. But that's the thing about mental health struggles. It encompasses so many things, like including addictions that make us uncomfortable, like with our AI girlfriends. Or maybe here's another addiction that might make you a little bit uncomfortable. I was reading another study this last week, and it shows us that of these Christian men who were surveyed, these are men who identified as Christians, that around 1 in 3 of them struggle with a pornography addiction. It got real quiet in here. Don't look around. 1 in 3. That makes you uncomfortable, doesn't it? Just to think that that's possible. And what's even more unsettling about that is these same men won't talk to anybody about it. And so it just gets worse. And the problem is exacerbated ultimately. It gets worse and worse and worse because dysfunction breeds in darkness. And when we don't talk about things, we live in the dark and we don't allow the light to shine in. And when we don't allow any light to shine in, that means the light of Jesus isn't even shining in on that moment. And people walk around in guilt. They walk around in shame. They walk around in isolation and fear that somebody's going to find out. And that's when things just get worse and worse and worse. That's the thing about addiction. If you suffer silently, addiction of any kind, if you suffer silently with it, it's just going to get worse. And eventually it's going to blow up. And it can happen to anybody. Anybody. You can seem like everything in your life is just right, just hunky-dory, perfect, rainbows and unicorns. It can be perfect from the outside looking in, but you know that it's not. How many people have you heard of? How many people have you personally known where it seemed like the world was their oyster, that they had the world by the tail and they could do whatever they wanted. Everything was perfect. But secretly, things were falling apart for them because they were living silently and isolated from everybody else. It turns out that even when things go really well in life, things can still go bad in life. Even when everybody thinks we should be happy, sometimes those smiles are difficult. The Apostle Paul is a giant in our faith. Right? No matter what you believe about Jesus or God or anything like that, what you can't deny is that this guy, Paul of Tarsus, he's one of the most influential characters in all of Western civilization history. Like, outside of Jesus, there is pretty much nobody who has impacted Western civilization, Western culture, as much as this guy, Paul. So Paul is a giant historically, but also theologically for us, if you're a follower of Jesus, especially. Paul did and said and wrote some amazing things. We find out that he was also performing these miracles, and people thought that in certain instances, his miracles were so powerful that he was performing. People thought he was a god. There's one story where he gets bit by a venomous snake, and he just shakes it off, and he doesn't die. And people are like, okay, we're going to worship you now. Paul did and said some amazing things. People thought he was a great teacher. Paul also had people who didn't always do what he said. I can't imagine what that's like. You know, that's the toughest part about being a dad. You have all these great things for your kids to do, and they just don't do them. They just don't do them, right? Paul started a church, and he felt like a spiritual father to this church in Corinth. And wouldn't you know it, like a lot of kids, they decide they know better than their dad. And they start saying, no, we're not going to listen to you anymore. You don't really know much. And they started hearing some voices from outside coming along. And these voices from outside said, you know what, Paul meant well, but he's not really telling you the full truth. He's not giving you the full gospel of Jesus right now. And I need to help you understand that more. If you'll just pay me $3.99 today and $2.99 tomorrow and every day after that, I can help you. And then there's this other guy who was a very eloquent speaker, and they said, no, we should be listening to a guy like this Apollos guy. We should listen to people like that. He really knows what he's doing. Well, they started walking away from Paul and embracing a different kind of gospel. And then there was all this kind of dysfunction within the church. There were people sleeping around. There were people still kind of worshiping other gods. They didn't really know what they were doing as a church because they were walking away from the instruction that Paul had given them. And so Paul writes them a letter and says, what are you doing? What are you doing? I mean, just like any dad who walks in is like, what are you doing? And they said, well, who are you? Who are you to tell us? And so Paul has to tell them, like, well, I'm the guy who started this church. I'm the guy who taught you everything you know about the good news of Jesus. I'm kind of your spiritual father. You should listen to me. And that meant a lot more in those days. He wasn't trying to be heavy-handed, but this is a society where you respect your elders and respect especially your parents. You honor your father and your mother. So they have this big dust up, and Paul finally says, look, I still care for you. I still want good things for you. Let's come back together. And they do. So Paul writes them another letter. And in this letter, he's reminding them of his call on his life that God has given him on his life. And he says, look, you've heard about these miracles that have been performed. And you know the stuff I teach. You've heard me preaching about this. And you've heard about all this amazing stuff. I've told you myself this amazing stuff that has happened. He's kind of proving his apostleship, his calling on his life to them. And in the middle of all of that, he stops and he says this, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. Everything seemed like it was going right for Paul. Paul was able to perform miracles. He got these special kind of words from God. Doors were being opened up to him. But he had this thorn in his flesh. And God allows this thorn in his flesh to help him not be conceited. Maybe you've heard of pastors, evangelists who got a little bit conceited and started thinking that it was their power, their strength that was responsible for all the good stuff they were seeing in their churches or in the ministries that they ran. That's what Paul's saying. In order that I didn't fall into that trap, I was given a thorn in my flesh. Now, we don't know what that thorn was. We don't know what that thorn was for him, what that really means. Some scholars have suggested that it was a physical ailment, maybe something to do with his eyes. Some have suggested even something like tinnitus with his ears. Some have said it was something with his legs, his hips. Others have said it might have even been a mental health struggle, a deep depression. And you can see how that might be true with a group like the Corinthians who had turned their backs on him and then came back and then turned their backs on him. And then, because they weren't the only ones, there were other groups that also turned their back on him and no longer listened to him. There's good evidence that his family probably had deserted him and turned their backs on him too. So it might have been depression, might have been some anxiety, may have been something completely different. We don't know. But here's Paul doing everything God asked of him. Here's Paul enduring the hardest of hardships. Here's Paul enduring persecution. He's being beaten, stoned, left for dead. He's doing everything God asked him to do, and he's being successful. And Paul says, and I was given a thorn in my flesh to keep me from being conceited, so that I didn't start thinking this was about me. You see, all the people who were coming against Paul and coming around after Paul sometimes in some of these churches, saying Paul means well, but he's not doing this. Paul means well, but he's not giving you the whole gospel. Those people had gotten conceited and thought that the gospel was about them and not about Jesus. They had gotten used to having authority over other people's lives and influence over other people's lives, and they got conceited. And what Paul knows is that if he was allowed to be conceited, then that would thwart what God was trying to do through him. That would get him off his mission. I don't know if you are familiar with him, but you probably have heard the name Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett is kind of the head guy at an investment firm called Berkshire Hathaway. And what you need to know about Warren Buffett, if you don't know anything else, is that he is one of the wealthiest individuals in the world. Some estimates put him as being worth $160 billion. That's billion with a B. That's a lot of money. don't know if you know that. $160 billion. Warren Buffett is famous for a frugal and simplistic lifestyle. He lives in the same house he bought in 1958. He's never moved. He had a flip phone up until 2020. He only drives used cars. He likes Cadillacs, but he only drives used cars because it's a better investment than buying a brand new one. And he'll drive them for like not just 1 or 2 years, like 10, 15. Every morning his breakfast isn't made by a personal chef or something like you might expect for a billionaire. Oh no. Every morning his breakfast is made by McDonald's. And he gets a $3 to $4 or $5 entree at McDonald's for breakfast. Get this, depending on whether or not the market is up or down. If the market's up, he might splurge for a $5 entree. If it's down, it's going to be $3. Probably getting the hash browns, I think. Egg McMuffin, who knows? So if you met this guy, he's in Omaha, Nebraska. If you met this guy, you probably wouldn't even know that he was a billionaire. I mean, he wears suits, but they're not like custom-made, tailored suits for this and that from Italy or something. They're just regular suits that he's gotten tailored like you should. You wouldn't know that he was a billionaire unless you'd seen his picture somewhere before. He lives simplistically and frugally. And the reason he does this is because he doesn't want to fall into the trappings of wealth. See, his goal in his life is at the end of his life to give away 99% of his wealth to charitable and philanthropic organizations. 99%. Now, if you're doing math, that means there's still 1.6 billion left for his kids. So that's pretty good. I mean, you're still giving away over $158 billion. He's living this way so that he doesn't fall into the trappings of wealth, thinking that he needs all of those things, and then he can't give away very much at the end of his life. He doesn't want to get off his mission. Same is going on with Paul. So Paul's given this thorn in his side, but he didn't appreciate it very much at first. In fact, here's what he tells us. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. 3 times. I said, God, take this thing away from me. Have you ever been there? You got that diagnosis. You got that bad news about this. You had this thing come up, that you got all this bad stuff happening in your life. And you said, God, take this away from me. Or maybe you had your own mental health struggle. God, take this thing away from me. Paul didn't appreciate what this thorn in his flesh was going to do for him. Most of us can't do it in the moment. My instinct when bad things happen to me is to go, God, take this thing away from me. Help me. Don't you love me? Don't you want good things for me? How can I help you if I'm preoccupied with this? Well, but Paul goes on. He says, but he said to me, talking about God, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Look at somebody next to you, say, perfect in weakness. Now, some of y'all didn't do it. I mean it. Perfect in weakness. Thank you. He says, therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me. So a couple of things you need to take note of. First of all, my grace is sufficient for you. God is talking to Paul, who's got a struggle, who's got a thorn in his flesh. What I think all of us can walk away from when we read those words is this idea, this understanding that no matter what you're going through, no matter what your mental health or even your physical health struggle might be, whatever your thorn in your flesh might be, His grace is sufficient for you. It's big enough for you. His love for you, His care for you, His wants and desires for you are bigger than that thing. It is sufficient for you. And the good news is that His power is made perfect in weakness. Where you might see a weakness, God sees a silver lining. Where you might see a weakness, God sees an opportunity to show His power, to show off a little bit. I mean, when you think about the ways that you or I or anybody else is lacking, the idea that God would work through us is a miracle in and of itself. When I think of all the things I've done or not done that God wanted me to do or didn't want me to do, when I think of all the ways I've failed God, the fact that God still wants to even know me blows my mind. The fact that God wants to do anything with me blows my mind. Because I don't deserve it. I should be disqualified. I'm not perfect. But God's power is perfected in my disqualifications. God's power is perfected in my weakness. In the areas where I prove that I am not God, God's power is ultimately perfected. And Christ's power works on me. And that's why Paul goes on. He says, that is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I'm weak, then I'm strong. For Christ's sake, he says, I delight. He's not saying I really enjoy this the same way I enjoy an ice cream sundae at night before I go to bed. He said, I delight. Like, this is good news for me. All the stuff, I'm good with it because I'm able to endure what's coming. Paul isn't weak. Think about what he endured. Weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, all kinds of difficulties. I told you, he was beaten often. He was stoned, and not in the 1970s way. He was stoned and left for dead. He was maligned by people that he thought loved him. So he was hurt emotionally, mentally, physically. You talk about church hurt, this guy had it. All of this stuff. He says, I delight in all of this. Even in the weakness, even in the thorn in my flesh, I delight in it. He wasn't weak. He had a weakness. He said, that's okay. Because with that, I am strong. Why is he strong? Because God is strong for him. It's God's power working through him. See, Paul's not saying I'm strong enough to get through it all. He's saying God is strong enough to get me through it all. God's power is allowing him to endure all of this stuff. And the same is true for you. At the beginning of this year, I read a book called This Naked Mind, and it's about alcoholism. Well, really it's about addiction of any kind, but it focused on alcoholism. And I remember I was reading this book with a friend who was struggling with alcohol at the time, and he was a little bit ahead of me. We were starting to read it together, and he started it a day or two before me. I said, well, what do you think? And he says, man, I love this book. I said, what's so great about it to you? He said, I loved it because in the first chapter, she says, I'm not weak. I said, what? She goes, yeah, I always thought I was weak, and that's why I couldn't overcome this. But the writer of this book writes that, actually, the fact that you're struggling with alcohol, rather than just giving up and going totally headlong into alcoholism, shows that you're actually resilient and therefore strong. That there is a part of you that's strong. You just have a weakness. It's not your identity. And the same is true for you, right? Whether it's addiction or any other mental health struggle, it's a weakness. And the fact that you're struggling with it doesn't make you weak. It actually makes you strong. It shows us that you really are a strong person. Now, couple that with this fact that God is working through you in all of this. That God is working through you in all of it, and that God sees that weakness, and where you see a weakness, God says, I'm not giving up. Where you see a weakness that disqualifies you, God says, no, I've got a lot more in store for you. In fact, here's the bottom line. What I want you to walk away with today is when we see weakness, God sees opportunity. He saw it in Paul. He sees it in you. If you've got a mental health struggle, God isn't done with you. God isn't writing you off. God's writing you in. God's saying, come on, this can be your testimony. This can be what you tell future generations about. This can be what you tell your church friends about. This can be something that changes somebody else's life. This can be good news. But it's only good news if you try to see it God's way. It's only good news if you try to see it God's way. The question you have to ask yourself, whether it's a mental health struggle of any kind or even physical, the question you got to ask yourself is, are you weak or is this a weakness? Is this your identity or is it a wound that needs healing? Is this who you are at your core or is it something God is helping you to endure? I want you to do something. I want you to imagine with me for just a moment that there are two people standing up here on the stage with me. Over here, I've got a 90-pound wuss, right? Just that person. The arm's about that big around. They're standing here. They couldn't even pick up a bag of cement or something. You with me? On this hand, over here, you've got somebody 6'4", 265 pounds, straight muscle, 2% body fat, chiseled, bodybuilder. They can pick up lots of bags of cement. But this bodybuilder has recently been injured as they've been training. They just a freak accident in the gym. They tore some muscles. They're wounded. And so we put this bag of cement in front of this bodybuilder and we say, hey, pick that up. And he's like, I can't. Now you look at the person and you go, what do you mean you can't? You're so big. He's like, I can't. I don't have the ability right now. You look at the 90-pounder over here and you go, can you pick that up? He goes, no, I've never been able to do that. You know? Let me ask you something. In this scenario, would that bodybuilder, would they be a weak person? Or do they just have a weakness? It's the same thing with our mental health. It's the same thing. It's just a weakness. It's a wound that needs healing. And the good news for you and for me and for everybody else is that these wounds are just kind of cracks in the armor that God fills up and says, let me perfect this a little bit. Let me make this better. Let me show you how powerful I am. Let's use this as a testimony for what God can do in your life. Let's point back and say, here's God doing this work in me. I didn't do it on my own. God did this work. So if you are like this bodybuilder where you've got a wound that needs healing, and especially in this mental health arena, let me tell you two things that I know to be true. The first is this: you have to be resilient. That's a new buzzword in psychological and therapy circles, but it's true. You have to be resilient. You have to keep going. You have to decide that you're going to keep going. When things are hard, when things are difficult, you have to make the decision. You're going to keep going. If that bodybuilder's ever going to get back into shape, if they're ever going to get through, they've got to start doing something. They can't just sit there and be mad that they have a wound. They've got to be resilient and keep going in life. But what they also have to do is get help. You also have to when you're wounded, you have to get help. Whether it be a doctor or a friend, a group of friends, people who know better how to get you from point A to point B. People who can carry you along as you got to go sometimes. You have to get help. You're not meant to do this on your own. That's why we exist in community. That's why we find each other in family. That's why we do this whole thing together. So as we wrap up this series this week, I want to remind you that mental health struggles of any kind, addiction, post-traumatic stress, bipolar, schizophrenia, you name it, that all of these things, they're just wounds. They don't define you. They're not your identity. They're hard, difficult things. But God says, I want to use that. I see an opportunity there. And if God can see that in us, let me challenge each of us. We should be looking to have that same connection to people. If God can see this in other people, then we should be able to see it in them too. My prayer for you is that you'll recognize that mental health and the struggles therein are just like physical health struggles. And that the only way to get through them is by being resilient and getting help. And to do that, you got to talk about it. Let's pray together. Lord, thank you that your grace is sufficient for us. And thank you that your power is made perfect in our weakness. Lord, help us to see our struggles not as defeat, but as places where you can work in and through us. God, give us courage to seek help. Give us the resiliency to keep going. Give us peace to rest in your love. And Lord, help us to offer this to other people around us who need it. In Jesus' name, amen.